you believers, non-believers, unaffiliated believers, sort of believers, and even you think I'm a believers, welcome. My non-university students, welcome to the Uncensored Unprofessor. Businesses have, or particular leaders have, a constant theme, a pet phrase that helps to define or even better, helps them market themselves. Right? Bernie Sanders, free lunch. Tony Robbins, your past does not equal your future. Deepak Chopra, there is no right or wrong, only possibilities. And this element of branding is apparent even inside the church, right? Catholics, they got the Pope or the Vatican. The Reformed, everything happens for a reason. Baptists, it's got to be biblical. Lutherans, justification by faith. Episcopalians, Druids for justice. Wait, I don't think they say it so baldly, even if that is what it has come to mean for them. Looking across all of that, I've come to realize I don't really have a tagline. I have emphases, yeah, beauty, truth, history, depth, trinity, nuance. But I don't have the signature line. Maybe, if I had to choose, Christ, the exegesis of the Father. Or, more broadly, the character of God. But goodness, those are meat and potatoes. And even though they come from the market, not so marketable. And yet, guys, that's okay. This show is not a net as wide as the ocean. I'm not first, trying to grow a big show. Sincerely, I want to think and share with Christians who know there's more to life than silly slogans, bumper stickers. Oh, dear Lord, I want to hang out with Christians who are interested in so much more important things than church growth. Can I get an amen?
Amen, brother.
Come on. There's not one cookie-cutter way to be a Christ follower. There aren't 3 easy steps to financial riches. There's no one recipe for a meaningful life. There's not a short biblical formula to guarantee God's blessings. And me, I don't do my life based on 3 pet doctrines or practices. Christianity is not formulaic. And when it is, it's always silly. No wonder so many are turning away from church attendance. This is about an orientation to a pure being, not solving a puzzle. This is about vocation and creativity and sharing, not cracking a code. The churches that focus on technique, they exhaust me. Life is complex, diverse, manifold, effulgent, resplendent, and all that makes it interesting, makes it an adventure. So thanks, my listener, for wanting to explore the adventure with me. Hey, I'd love your support. I have subscriber friends giving me $2 a month. Please consider even a $2 to $3 monthly pledge at Patreon, Patreon. Help me pay for the show's production. Thanks. If you ever hung around the church for long, you will have heard this one. The blood of the martyrs is the seeds of the church. First uttered in the 2nd century by Tertullian in Carthage, that line posits that whenever the church suffers, she grows. More likely today, you will hear this in a moss truncated form. The church always does better when she's persecuted, or persecution is always good for the church. To which, when I hear those, I always say, you first. But, is that even true? Is it the case that the church always grows when Christians suffer for the faith? Or is it true that persecution is always good for church growth, church health? To explore this, I want to peruse some historical eras with you. Seasons of history where there was intense persecution, suffering, and, even martyrdom. Like I said with this episode's intro, I don't like slogans. And I especially don't like slogans when they run roughshod over nuance and smother the truth. So, our first era will be the era of initial Jerusalem persecution. The Christian way, the church, was first illicit in the eyes of the Jews because the Christians proclaimed that their false Messiah, false in the eyes of the Jews, right? That their Messiah was the Lord. So Jews persecuted Christians as Jewish heretics, not just sectarians, but as heretics. Paul the Pharisee, prior to his conversion to Christ on the Damascus Road, he participated in that Jewish persecution of the first Christians. And we should note that while the church did expand, for example, they fled Jerusalem to escape Jewish persecution and then Roman persecution with the destruction of the temple in 70, while the church did expand, the growth really came from A, proclaiming the gospel, and B, from the kind of miraculous signs and wonders we read about in the book of Acts. Those signs and wonders accompanied the apostles and their community as they moved out of the region formerly known as Israel. People were drawn to Christianity during this season. But we simply must be careful to say the church grew because of Jewish persecution. Honestly, there are just not enough records. There's not enough data available for us to know about the growth of the church. During the first couple hundred years or so, they were just too small to be noticed by outsiders. Let's move to Roman persecution. Let's move to the Roman era. This is the era about which Tertullian, in our earlier quote about blood and growth, was referring. It's an era of profound Christian growth. Still, during the Roman era, say from Jesus' death to the collapse of the empire in the 5th century, Christianity was illicit. I mean, after all, the Christians worshipped Jesus as Lord. And that worship was both a challenge to the Roman pantheon of gods, about whom Paul had taught they're really not gods. It was a challenge to that, and more poignantly, it was a challenge to the Roman Empire's notion that Caesar was a god. In the minds of many Romans, the blessings and peace, the Pax Romana, that they enjoyed were the result of Caesar's authority and status and power and favor. Christianity presented a tacit challenge to all of that. Christianity presented a tacit challenge to the civil religion of Rome. By the way, you guys, I happen to believe Christianity should offer an open, not even tacit challenge today here in the U.S. too. Our newly inflamed and ensconced civil religion chants, "There is no such thing as truth. You are your skin color. Trust us, we are only here to save you." And yeah, it really is acting very much like a new religion. It has its pet dogmas. We believers need to offer strategic persuasion and nonviolent resistance to those bald lies. Oh, sorry, but I've departed my charted path. Now, the old school history of church growth during the Roman era, we would have been taught that tens upon tens of thousands of Christians were martyred. But more recent and accurate scholarship, say for example from W.H.C. Friend, The Rise of Christianity, these scholars have clarified that those earlier numbers were in fact inflated. Now, it is true that Christians were martyred, but no, not in terms of tens of thousands. More carefully, there were about 6,000 who died for the sake of Christ in those first 250 years. Now that's still a lot of people. But it's not the same as saying there were tens of thousands spread out everywhere all over the empire who were dying for Christ's name. But it is still fair to ask, why did the church grow during those 400 years or so of the Roman Empire? And I want to enumerate some reasons for you. First, Christianity offered hope, not only of forgiveness, thank you, Lord, for forgiveness, but of an afterlife, a final life made new in the resurrection. And that was a profoundly vivid, tangible hope that captured the Roman Empire's imagination. Hope. Secondly, the church grew because it offered hope of final justice. Everyone's mindful of suffering and pain and injustice. Christianity taught that even though in this life women are raped, even though foreign armies invade and pillage and loot and destroy without repercussion, and even though in the here and now the powerful continue to feast off the poor, there is a God who would ensure that there was hell to pay for that kind of injustice. And the just moral vision of Christianity should never be underestimated. People across the Roman Empire were drawn to those notions of final justice. Third, Christianity was happy to engage with arguments of reason and logic. The educated in Roman society found Christianity particularly appealing because the Christian God was not only reasonable himself, but the creator of both reason and intellect. In small part, I did my recent Science-y Stuff series to promote this element. They liked that Christianity was favorable toward reason and logic. Fourth, Christianity was inclusive. Christianity wasn't defined by race or skin color. The small c Catholic Church was, at the sociological level, inclusive of all peoples, all cultures, traditions. One didn't need to have been born a Christian to be one. But still more, ancient Christianity was inclusive of both slaves and women. No, it's not true that the major growth came from slaves or women, but slaves and women were as likely to be drawn to Christianity as free persons, as citizens, as men. I mean, women were allowed to attend Christian religious services. Women were allowed to prophesy in Christian religious services. Even a slave could contribute to the good of the Christian community. Oh, and before I move on, those ancient Christians were not being inclusive for the sake of being inclusive in whatever vague, ill-defined way that has come to mean today. No, they were being inclusive because that's the heart of Christ. The Blessed Trinity is a sharing God. They weren't being inclusive of pedophiles or thieves or prostitutes who wanted to continue pedophiling, stealing, or sexting. But they were inclusive. Impelled by the Spirit of God and the heart of Christ, they welcomed people. And that welcoming spirit was a huge draw for new members. Community celebrating Jesus Christ. And fifth, let's be clear. The church did grow owing to sympathy. People feel compassion for those who are wrongly harassed, persecuted, and especially when they're tortured. It didn't help the Roman Empire in the long run to have taken individual Christians into arenas and fed them to lions, or having lit them on fire or crucified them in public. Witnesses feel the horror of all that, realize the injustice. It turns people's hearts toward the aggrieved, not against, when we see them suffer. But if we're careful, we will realize that the intense persecution of Christians in this era was mostly localized. In this region, southern Turkey, or that, North Africa. And wherever the growth of the church was observable by local Roman governors like Septimius Severus, they felt threatened and enacted physical violence against the Christians. The truth is, though, there were only a couple Caesars, Decius and Valerius, both in the 3rd century, who tried but could not fully enact, simply because it used up too many resources. They tried to enact empire-wide persecution. So we can grant to Tertullian some points here, right? I mean, Christian blood did cause church growth. However, and this is an enormous however, we must see all this in its cultural context. Rome was a polytheistic society. Not only did Rome have a pantheon of gods, many of whom they adopted and renamed from the Greek pantheon, the Roman attitude toward religion was, whatevs. Whatever works for you. You like going to seances? Coolio. You like attending ritual prostitution at the Temple of Venus? Hey, good if that lights your fire. Go for it. There was very much a live and let live attitude of tolerance among both the populace and the Roman Empire, the leaders. As long, and this was key, as long as your worship, your public practice of your religion did not threaten Roman constructs of power, it was all good. And frankly, we can see apologies, explanations to that in Luke's book, Acts. Over and over and over, Luke showing the reader that Christianity has no intention of threatening the Roman political structure. Luke showing us over and over and over, Christians are good citizens too. Again, the Roman persecution, the martyrdom of Christians took place in a polytheistic society. A society that didn't care about religion as long as religion didn't threaten the political powers. And in that context, sympathy, empathy for Christian confessors are those who suffered but who did not die, empathy for confessors and martyrs ended up benefiting the church in the long run. And so far, Tertullian was right. Church suffering did lead to church growth in the Roman era. But not all cultures are polytheistic, and certainly not, emphatically not, it's not the case that all political powers are so tolerant. So there's some Roman era observations for you. Let me move forward in history. Hey, this is a mom and pop podcast. I appreciate all the help I can get. Prayers for the Lord's favor and provision, social media shares, or telling a friend about the show, all sincerely appreciated. You guys, stemming from my recent Science-y series, a photon is going through the airport security. The TSA agent asks if he had any luggage. The photon says, "No, I'm traveling light." Thanks, Colleen. Muslim persecution. When the former orphan boy Muhammad came to power around AD 600, big swaths of the Middle East and North Africa had been touched by, influenced by, shaped by Christianity. Though we need to emphasize, Christianity did not unite these diverse areas into a single realm like we see over in Western Europe. But entire tribes had adopted worship of Christ. And by the time of Muhammad's death in 632, the Arabs, who were a formerly fragmented clan, they had captured Palestine, Syria, Mesopotamia, Persia, and most of Egypt. In 697, they captured Carthage, the capital of North Africa, from whence our formerly noted Tertullian had lived. And by 715, the Arabs had captured most of Spain. So we're talking about an incredibly fast series of conquests. And unlike the Romans before them, the Arabs did not let the conquered peoples freely practice their religions. Christians under Muslim rule began to slowly, or sadly in many cases instantly, die out or convert to Islam. Now, there were early atrocities that happened that resulted from nomadic raids. In 627 at Medina, Muhammad rounded up a Jewish group, the Quraizas, and, with his own helping hands, beheaded all their grown men, took the women and children into slavery. In 636, the Muslims invaded the villages along the Tigris and Euphrates, and on this incursion, monasteries were pillaged, monks were killed, and Christian Arabs were massacred, enslaved, or forced to convert to Islam. The population of Elam was decimated. In Susa, the leaders were murdered by the sword. In AD 639 in Egypt, the residents of Benessa and Nikyu, two towns, were entirely annihilated by the Muslims. In this incursion, there were Christians who betrayed. Bat-Yor says that they were betrayed out of spite by other Christians from exterior tribes who turned to help the Muslims. You guys, much of the Middle East is still characterized by tribalism today. In 642, Palestine was laid waste and plundered. Towns were annihilated. Women and children were raped and enslaved. So what we had first were nomadic raids. But then there was a systematic way of persecuting both Jews and Christians. And this systemic, patternized persecution is now academically known as dimitude. Class, say dimitude.
Dimitude, teacher.
Dimitude was implemented by many caliphs, including the long history of the Ottoman Empire, which lasted from the 14th to the 20th centuries. The Arabic word dhimmi means non-Muslim living in a Muslim state, or an air quotes, protected, a protected person. Sort of like how inclusive today means excluding Caucasians, men, Christians, and conservatives.
Ah, so inclusive.
So there's dimitude, and under dimitude proper, under Islamic rule, the Middle Eastern Christians were not simply slaves. The situation was far more complex than that. Jews and Christians were necessary for the functioning of the Islamic political economic system. We need to be clear, the Jews and Christians were not equals in that relationship with the Muslims. Christians and Jews did not get to vote. They didn't get to protest, or didn't get to protest for long. Here are some of the features of dimitude. Non-Muslims could not own land. They could manage and care for it, but not own it. The more choice lands were taken and given to a caliph's family members. Entire Christian people groups were exterminated. The Christians who were allowed to live were forced to pay numerous taxes, land taxes, including the land for which they managed, poll taxes when they traveled, tax collector taxes, harvest taxes, and a general tax that was taken for military reasons as well as to keep the Muslims in clothing. Moreover, Christians were forced to build buildings and roads and boats. Christians were not allowed either to build new places of worship or repair old ones. That was part of the systemic state of dimitude. Even as recent as 2019, Tayyip Erdogan, the Prime Minister of Turkey, he decided that the ecumenical patriarchate of Constantinople in Istanbul could not reopen the Orthodox seminary that was closed by Turkey in 1971. There's this pattern under Islam of not allowing Christian places of worship being built or repaired. Furthermore, in dimitude, Muslim men could marry Christian and Jewish women and raise those children as Muslims, but dhimmi, the subjugated, could only marry their own kind. And in all of this, the Muslims were not nearly so tolerant as we're led to believe by the 21st century media. Dhimmis suffered in ways which guaranteed to erode all religions but Islam. And that pattern, that system of dimitude, it clarifies that on the one hand, Jews and Christians were conquered and stripped of power and dehumanized to keep them powerless. On the other hand, Jews and Christians were a necessary component of the Islamic way of life. So the horrific lottery ticket of dimitude was a systemic way for Muslims to benefit from the service of the subjugated, the dhimmis, without allowing those subjugated to prosper, worship freely, or flourish. The significant takeaway for our question today, does the church always grow and thrive during persecution, is I want you to see that answer depends upon the context. Under the Romans, a polytheistic and tolerant culture, the church expanded. Under the Muslims, even through today, where Christians are systematically driven out in Bethlehem, Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Pakistan, et al., does the church grow and expand and flourish? Not at all. Why? Why no church growth under Muslim domination? Or better, why no church existence under Muslim domination? Well, scholars dispute that question. But whatever the cause, is it the Quran itself? Is it because Muhammad, as the great Muslim exemplar, didn't allow them to flourish? Is it just as simple as tribalism? Whatever the cause, Islam is not finally tolerant of other religions. Here's the remarkable, if gruesome reality. An ardently monotheistic religion, Islam, makes no room for other monotheisms. And what I want you to get today? No, not at all has the church survived under Muslim domination, let alone thrived when she was being persecuted by Muslim caliphs. There were entire swaths of the Middle East that were formerly Christian. A big chunk of Syria was, right through most of the 20th century, a Christian territory. But under the totalitarian government of Bashar al-Assad, those Christians have been driven out. I mean, huge numbers of those migrating into Europe through Italy and Greece, they're Syrian Christians, driven out by Muslims. So, all of that to say, sorry Tertullian, you're wrong that the blood of the martyrs always equals the seeds of the church. Because the blood of Christian martyrs across 15 centuries in Muslim countries, that blood cries out in abject silence. Or those who think everything works out to the good, tell that to millions of Christian parents who lost their daughters and sons under Muslim domination. Tell that to millions of Christian folks who lived in little tribes that had formerly dotted the Middle East, because their suffering produced no growth. Their deaths produced zero revival. Their presence produced nothing at all by way of lasting Christian cultural legacy. God have mercy. Come quickly, Lord Jesus. My heart has been warmed recently. How, you ask? By Facebook shares of UU posts. On that point, my sincere thank yous to Victor S., Colleen S., Daniel F., Cody A., Chris A., and Meredith W. Dobra. Thank you. Let's move on to the era of Russian persecution. The Soviet Marxists saw Christianity as a direct threat to their goals. I mean, after all, Christianity seeks the free-willing allegiance and commitment of its adherents. Marxism, because it's a totalizing ideology, and one, by the way, that's not interested in persuading people to free-willingly adopt it, it merely wants submission. Because Marxism is a totalizing ideology,
Dr. Yu, what is totalizing?
Makes room for no competition. Because Marxism is a totalizing ideology, it dealt with Christianity in Russia in three central ways. First, it outlawed it as illegal. I mean, after all, dreary Karl had argued religion was delusional, the opiate of the people. Knowing Marxism viewed religion as evil, we're not surprised to know that the Marxists burned churches to the ground, looted church bells and precious artwork, stole and burned ancient Bibles, imprisoned church priests by the tens of thousands, and sent to the gulag lay people by the millions. That was the Marxist means, the Marxist use of legal power. And then there was the issue of education. By teaching school children that Christianity was for old grandmothers and other superstitious cranks, the Marxists sought to turn culture against Christianity. That was the negative approach, to denounce in front of the kids. The positive approach was to reprogram, or honestly to brainwash, Russian children into materialist philosophy. And both those educational strategies goes to the means of propaganda. And then a third strategy was to co-opt. And for a tiny minority of churchly power brokers, the Marxists offered goodies, alcohol, meats, cigarettes, small tokens of independence. They offered goodies for those who would sell out, collaborate with the Soviet power brokers, rat out other committed believers, hand over lists of the disobedient. All of that went to the means of betrayal. And again, you guys, we have to stop and ask ourselves, now that we're 104 years past the October Revolution and the slaughter of tens of millions of Christians by the Marxists, did the church do better or worse for enduring Marxist tyranny? That question's a joke, right? The church in Russia hasn't even come close to recovering today. How can you eviscerate a community, the church, of leaders across 80 years, from theologians to priests to lay leaders, and think it can come out of all of that like it was just a short nap? When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, church leaders all over the planet were hopeful a revival would happen in and through the church in Russia. I remember. I was working on my PhD then. My seminary profs were super excited at all the possibilities of a Christian cultural resurgence in Russia. Today, those hopes and dreams have gone largely unfulfilled. 4 generations of brainwashing children has left Russia cold toward religion, apathetic about objective truth, and bitter. 4 generations of murdering leaders and brainwashing school children, it is effective to producing an entire culture of indifference and mediocrity and listlessness. So again, big picture. Does the church always do better under persecution? You first.
I heard that.
Yeah, you volunteered to be thrown to the lions before me. I'll allow you to give your daughters to the caliph's cousins before I step forward, if you don't mind. My daughters are precious to me. And I think I'll let your pastor step up to the hangman's noose before I betray and offer up my dear pastor. No, the church does not always do better under persecution. That's just not the witness of history. Despite persecution, does the church continue to live on? Yes. Even a remnant seems to endure the most unspeakable of situations. A remnant, residue. Does God allow his church to be persecuted? Duh, of course. Does that always equate to the in-time and in-space success and flourish of church growth? No. Again, that's just silliness. So why, maybe you're wondering, why, Ed, why did you take an episode to address the notion, the glib notion, that Christian blood always equals missional flourish? Because so many Christians today are saying aloud about America,
"Oh, it's no big deal. We'll do better when we're made illegal."
Because so many Christians are asleep at the wheel.
The U.S. government would never crush the church here. That's just alarmist speak. Alarmatism.
Seriously? Are you naive or just willfully ignorant of history? Because, for starters, the Rona 19 slotch mismanagement of our government shows that freedom of religion is no longer important to our political leaders, left or right. What is important to them? Oh, keeping liquor stores, superstores, airlines open. In short, keeping big political donors happy. But not churches. Not. But that, as we're now watching, that is just the beginning. I mean, as anticipated by anyone paying attention, the Biden administration and the Democrats have proposed the Equality Act. Already sounds double-speakish to me. The Equality Act will, Catholic attorney Kenneth Craycraft notes, the Equality Act will amend, which is code for eliminate. It will amend the Civil Rights Act to forbid discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, but it would also fulfill the abortion industry's long-fought desire to establish abortion as health care, officially and legally, by outlawing pregnancy discrimination. Another double-speak phrase for pro-life positions. Pregnancy discrimination will be outlawed. The new law, the Equality Act, requires that access to treatment for pregnancy must not be any different from access to any other kind of health care for any other physical condition. But Craycraft continues, this is all code language for implementation of a vigorous national policy of abortion on demand for any or no reason. Moreover, the attorney clarified, the Equality Act would make opposing abortion access morally equivalent to opposing dialysis or stitching a wound or setting a fractured arm. If there's no morally serious argument to be made against setting fractures, neither can there be a morally serious argument against providing an abortion. End quote. Now, my listeners, ask yourself, who does not want to offer abortion on demand as an equivalent to stitching a wound or kidney dialysis? That's right, real Christians, the confessing church. The Equality Act has targeted in its crosshairs the freedom to practice religion, to follow one's conscience after God, and it's hardly subtle. It's an open and direct attack on freedom of religion. Still more, the Equality Act ensures that transgender men can compete in women's sports and enter women's bathrooms and spas and locker rooms. Women, girls, you are so going to pay big time for the Biden administration's aggressive goal, which is, there is no such thing as biological sex. Nope. Don't you even think it. Counselors will be fined or jailed for helping those struggling with their sexual identity. And that's not all. The Biden administration, led by Vice President Kamala Harris, is proposing yet another law, also given double-speakish a BS name, the Do No Harm Act. That proposed law will remove, not mute, but remove religious exemptions for abortions, contraceptives, and even the funding of surgeries for transgender alterations. What's the uptake? Freedom of religion will be eliminated. Pastors may be fined or arrested for preaching traditional biblical standards about sexuality and the dignity of the unborn. And, sorry guys, but these are only the beginning. If you feel willfully ignorant, if you feel that those are where it will stop, you're kidding yourself. Am I, building off my last couple episodes, am I pretending to see the progressives' hearts? Nope. I don't need to see their hearts. I'm taking them at their word. I'm judging their actions. I am heeding the history of their ideology. And that ideology manifests in repeated patterns. The more they get away with things now, the more they will aggressively take action later. That's how bullying works. Pure und simple. The history of this ideology, Marxism 2.0, also known as materialism, shows us that it always runs full steam ahead. What will come after it? A steady erosion of freedom of religion. Because Marxism 2.0 is the new dogmatic religion of our era. And like Islam and Marxism 1.0 centuries gone by, it is totalizing. It tolerates no other gods. It denies freedom of speech and freedom of thought. It means to devour. Unchecked, bullies always seek domination. Lordy, there are things we're standing for. If we don't take a stand now, before these laws are enacted, the bully will be far more difficult to unseat in months and years to come. What can you do? Write your local congressmen, senators, and leaders. Go onto your email application and make a group email with everybody's address, all those congressmen and senators and leaders, so that you type out one letter, hit the send button, and it goes to all 8 or 10 of them. Thank you, Jerry, for that idea. What else to do? Pray, of course. What else? Send donations to agencies like the Alliance Defending Freedom. That's an agency run by Christians to do battle in the courts of America, in the Supreme Court of the United States. They're legal experts, constitutional experts. And what else? Please, oh please, stop saying things like, the church always does better when she's persecuted, because it's just not true. Well, good. A couple of final phrases. Don't be so open-minded that your brains fall out. In fact, go and turn your beautiful God-given brains on, everybody.